This revolution is not going away.
This is the Ron Paul Liberty Report with Ron Paul, Daniel McAdams, and Chris Rossini.
We are all ambassadors of the Ron Paul doctrine, and it's so simple. Just tell the truth.
An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today, we have Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Doing fine, thank you.
All right.
We have a few things to talk about, a lot of activities. There's a lot of activities around the world, but there's a lot of activities here at home today. A lot of decisions being made with a very imperfect system of electing leaders to our government.
Yeah.
So, yes, there's a lot going on. You know, I had a call, somebody related to Thomas's campaign, and they said, what's your last minute advice? What's your last minute advice? I says, make sure you have enough poll watchers.
Yeah.
You have a right to know what's going on. Because I remember very clearly, you know, in 1971, that's when they closed the gold window, and I got excited about the whole idea of the monetary policy in the Federal Reserve. And so I wanted to speak out, and that was the Watergate era. And there was no practical way of saying, oh, okay, I'm going to be a congressman. I never had that happen. I never said, that is my goal, is to be a congressman. But I did have a goal to speak out. You know, there was a special election came up in early 76, and so I thought, oh, maybe I'll just get involved in there and speak out about what I want to talk about. Won't amount to much. But the whole thing is there was a fluke. You know, I won the election, you know, and but this really shook up the Democrats because there were no Republicans. There were only 3 Republicans in all of Texas in the House. So they said, boy, what's going on here? So they said, Paul got too much attention on this thing, so we better take care of him because there was another election in the fall. Because that was just a part term. The special election came up, and I was still pretty naive, pretty innocent about this election stuff. So I went through and I said, oh, you know, I just won it. I've been in Congress for 6 months now, so no big deal. And guess what? I lost. I lost by 100 votes.
Wow.
And then we count again and say, oh, no, you really lost by 300 votes. I don't remember the exact number, but it was very, very close. So we had a contest, and then I gathered together people, oh, don't you know you have to have poll watchers? And it turned out that they were able to switch it, manipulate the course. We won, and finally we found 1,300 votes that were illegal, absolutely illegal, and that would have done everything to have won the election. So that they even fired, in the middle of all this, one of the Supreme Court justices and put a new guy in the middle of all this. Wow. And then they had another vote, and of course my case was lost, and it was all over. But the lesson I learned was, have poll watchers. So the next go around, I did have that, and it was a little fairer. But the problem has existed for a long time. Just think of the LBJ Senate race stuff. That was notorious on how he was elected and stole an election. So it happens, and I think it still continues to happen. So you might say, well, what was the real result of the election of 2000? Trump said it was stolen. Yeah. And I don't know what else, but it's believable. Yeah. It's believable. But anyway, I was a little bit facetious, but I'm a little bit serious too. Watch how they count the votes, and who knows? It might be close by. My race that they were able to manipulate, it was literally 100 votes, and then it went to 300 votes, then it went to 1,300 votes, and they were still able to pull it off. So this is something that if it's a real close race, it makes an opportunity. Now, if Thomas can win by 5% of votes, there's not going to be much of an argument.
Yeah.
But when they're close, they're able to manipulate it. So poll watching is very important, and it's a great deal of shortcomings with these demands to have pure democracy and have all this. Just have an election and truth will come out.
Yeah.
Not if you control the polls.
Yeah. And those foreign oligarchs from outside Kentucky who've put millions into it, they're not going to sit by and watch their millions go to waste.
That's right. Maybe. Oh, well, I'm sure my advice will not be new. I'm sure they're not in that race. They're not nearly as naive as I was in 1976.
Absolutely. Well, I guess what we're going to talk about today is related in a way, and it's the cost of the war. The Financial Times came out with an article. We can put that first one up. That is a shocker, but it only reveals part of the thing, part of the issue, Dr. Paul. Donald Trump's Iran war hits Americans with a $40 billion fuel bill. Extra spending on gas and diesel exceeds cost of repairing countries' bridges or rebooting air traffic control. So that's a instead of what kind of subtitle, but it definitely hits the point. We've paid $40 billion more than we would have paid for our gasoline and diesel if this war hadn't been started. That's pretty significant, I think.
Right. You know, this mess that they're talking about right now, the $40 billion and, leading to gas being $5 a gallon, that sort of thing. This is something that has to be understood, because war has a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
They can't predict anything to do that. I don't know whether they're complete lying or naive about, this is duck soup. We can win this war in no time at all. Yeah. And then it goes on for 30 years. I mean, just think of the Iraq War and Afghanistan. Those wars are actually still going on. Yeah. And so I don't know whether they're just not, or innocent, thinking, well, we know what's going on, and we're going to limit it, and we're going to play these games. But then they introduce the idea of paying for it, and that's what we're talking about. How do they pay for it? Is it easy to just raise taxes on 5% on every American that have all the money they need to run these wars? No, they don't. They are not. They're already 39 trillion dollars in debt, so they can't do that. So they have to inflate. They have to print money. They have to have, corruption in money, which is a bigger corruption than even stealing votes. So they go to do that, and then you have all the unintended consequences of inflation. And prices go up, and the people who vote for the war or allow the war to go on, which is really discouraging, is the wars are started now without a proper authority and no declaration, and presidents can go to war at will, and then, well, that's not a problem. The founders put in a correction for that. They can't get money unless the Congress votes them the money. Oh, okay, the Congress could be for this war. This war is a stupid war.
Yeah.
No, but what do? They don't vote.
They don't do anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's part of democracy. And part of democracy is you have this ability to vote when you feel like it. So if you don't want to vote and find out and let what the founders, or the congressmen, and what the people who pay the bills, the citizens, they don't have a chance. So this goes on, and now we're looking at the consequence of war, the spending, then the inflation, and then the anger.
Yeah.
The anger is probably, I think, the most serious part of all this, because it divides a nation. It's who's in charge. And right now, that battle is going on strong. And some people say, some people get credit for, being very principled. Thomas is very principled. He always voted with the Constitution.
Yeah.
Well, that is not necessarily always popular with the demagogues out there. So what is it? Is it that the other people don't have a principle? I've decided they do have a principle. Their principle is being elected.
Yeah.
No matter how you do it, you steal the votes if you have to, you print the money if you have to, and that is a principle on their part. And they have no feeling of guilt about lying and running a country like that and destroying the whole system. So the system that was proposed by the founders is it's now a distant dream, and now we're still seeing this, and we're seeing a lot of it going on today. And we need the poll watchers, but we're going to need a lot more than a poll watcher at the election, because we need some poll watching at where our kids are getting their education and a lot of other things.
No kidding. Well, let's look a little bit more into this $40 billion since the February 28th U.S. attack on Iran. So the study was done by Brown University's Watson School of International and Public Affairs. They estimate the conflict's hit to consumers from higher fuel prices, $41.5 billion as of Sunday night, or $316 per household. Now you could say, well, that's a small price to pay. That's not very much. Well, that's actually a lot, and that's only part of the story. And also the thing is that you would always say, Dr. Paul, is that $316 per household would hit people differently too. People in the rural areas, they may have to commute further to work. Poorer people may have to commute further to work. White collar workers, that live in the city are not going to have to drive as much. So it does, I think, hit people a lot differently. Now go to the next one. And this is the other part. This is the other part of the story, Dr. Paul. The fallout from the Iran war has ripped across the world's biggest economy, driving inflation to its highest level since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But here's the other part. Higher prices at the pump have not only taken a toll on motorists, but have also pushed up the cost of everything from groceries to airfares, as escalating fuel costs feed through to other sectors. Now go to the next one. U.S. gas prices have jumped 51% to reach $4.51 a gallon on Sunday, according to the AAA. And I highlight this part. It's the sharpest rise of any G7 nation, with diesel surging 54%. So we are actually disproportionately suffering with regard to the increase in gasoline and diesel prices.
The article and message from Brown University is significant, and they make a point, and it's a good point, but it's not the final point.
Yeah.
And that is, we don't need to spend the money. There's better ways to spend it. There's the infrastructure, and some of that could be true. It could be. The one thing is, it would be a lot better than another war going on to save it. But the one thing they didn't mention by Brown is the other option is, and there'd be enough to go around, to add some to the infrastructure, and then even have some left over and give it back, leave it in the pockets of the people, and let them decide how it's going to be spent. And then this day and age, there's a lot of local construction. It should be done more locally, and there's private ways of spending things. There's all these options, but there would be a lot of money to go around to spend it differently. But my only very mild suggestion is let the people keep some of this too, and let them decide how it should be spent and what's this money's going to be used for.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a bit of a quibble, but the point is made. You're right. I mean, even if you waste it on some of this, it's better than wasting it on bombs. You may get some potholes filled or something. But now here's even more. If you go to this next one, the higher fuel prices have sent a torrent of inflation coursing through the economy as input costs for producing and transporting goods rise. Consumer prices increased at the fastest pace in 3 years in April, while wholesale prices rose at the quickest rate since 2022. Now, here's something that caught my attention yesterday, Dr. Paul. The inflationary burst has also driven up the cost of debt. The U.S. Treasury last week issued 30-year bonds at 5% yield for the first time since 2007, amid investor concerns over the bout of higher price growth. And I think those 10-year bonds are creeping up toward 5% as well, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Paul. So that's no, not that yet. So that means higher prices on bonds than in the last 20 years. So what is that going to do with Trump pressuring the new Fed chairman to lower interest rates? How does that work?
Well, the market will sort it out, believe me, because if they don't pay the interest rate, which is the market rate, the market bursts through all this. And it's always artificial. It's a farce to think, well, get the Federal Reserve. We have to have the correct board. They don't know either what it should be. The market does know what it is, and it will resolve it. But it's very painful is what's going to happen, because before you know it, you have to pay $5 for a gallon of gas. What if it goes to $10?
Yeah,
and you know what? I believe it will go to $10 at the rate we're moving, and I still always want to make the point that the biggest danger of all this mischief is the conflict among the groups of people. There's the people who have something are the targets. They are the targets because they have the money. Some of them they stole themselves and they participated in the war profiteering. But there's a lot of people who saved money and had money, and they're going to be punished as well. But I think we see the violence already coming out in our streets, and they're always talking about, well, the prices are too high, but they never say, well, the money is all fake.
Yeah.
And the interest rates are so manipulative. Interest rates are so important and can direct it. But I believe that even with the regulations up or down, what the Fed does, there is going to be another one. But loans will be in the black market, or whether it go private. A lot of credit now is going in the private sector, and because they can't afford it. If the price is going up 10%, why can they only get 5% on their interest? So they can't do it. So they have to pay attention to that. And this I think is just another example. It's not like we haven't talked about this, but ultimately I think the solution is re-education of a whole generation of young people. And that's why I'm always delighted to see that the young people are making more sense on the war issue than the older people.
Yeah.
And because if they're at the age that they're going to be taxed, they're already being taxed, they're having trouble finding jobs, and the cost of living is going up. So they're already having trouble. And that, I think, is an indication that the young people waking up, but they need to be guided. That's why I'm so supportive of any institution that will teach honest economic policy and talk about the basic fundamentals that the founders understood on monetary policy, which was all undermined in 1913, when we said, no, the people aren't smart enough to do it, and there were some problems. What we need to do is have a central bank.
Yeah.
And then guess what? Jefferson rolled over in his grave.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sound we heard. Well, the U.S. has been fighting innumerable little small and almost invisible wars since the end of the Cold War. The pain is there, but it's not directly felt by the American people. As you always say, inflation hides some of it and they move it around. But I do honestly believe that this Iran war is such that this is the first time that Americans will really directly feel pain. Now, they won't have bombs hopefully drop on our homeland because of it, but there will be repercussions, and it'll be these massive fuel costs. Now, what America is also realizing is that President Trump doesn't care, and that's why his numbers are so bad. If you go to that next one, this is still from the FT article, but the president caused a stir last week when he said domestic inflationary burst was not motivating him to end the war, quote, even a little bit. Here's what he said when asked about it. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. And I think when Americans see that and they feel the pain of this billions of dollars that are being taken from them directly, I don't think they're going to be very sympathetic. Dr. Paul, I don't think this is a good campaign slogan for the midterms. I don't care about Americans' financial situation, so
And-
vote GOP.
And besides, this is disingenuous because what we're doing today has encouraged more than ever for the Iranians not to cooperate, because there's been times they have cooperated and worked in the direction of having inspectors and everything else. But no, it's going in the opposite direction. The more they are threatened, the more it's logical for them, because there was a time I honestly believe that they were willing to work in a direction of having no active program. But now it's people say, "Oh, you're supporting the terrorists." That term terrorist bugs me.
Yeah.
How come you're not a terrorist if you're dropping bombs out of the sky and killing thousands of innocent people?
Yeah.
And that's where our money goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Trump may need another little war like Venezuela to boost those numbers, or frighteningly enough, he may think he does. And this is something that you found on Politico. Yes, Trump might really attack Cuba. The shift comes as administration officials struggle to convince the Cuban regime to make major economic and political changes. This is from Politico. Go to the next one. The Trump administration has been dancing around the question of whether it will carry out military strikes against Cuba. I'm told it's increasingly willing to take such a step. And I've seen some other things on X about this, Dr. Paul, the possibility of them preparing to do a military strike of some sort on Cuba. It seems absolutely insane, but then again, so did attacking Iran. So
it brings back memories of 1962 to me, because and there was somebody who made this statement, but it doesn't give the name of the individual, and that is that they said they have determined that the exiles have no role here except as cheerleaders and gadflies. And, don't let anybody let out the truth, because of course that was the big issue on whether or not Kennedy, he was surviving that. And because he had a difference in foreign policy, and he didn't want to blow up the whole island of Cuba, they weren't patient enough to do it, through democracy. Their democracy was, taking care of Kennedy, and that's one assassination that the American people now have become aware of. I think it's like 70 or 80% of the American people believe our government was involved in the Kennedy assassination, and that's why the trustworthiness is shot. And so every time there is an assassination, I can't help but thinking, whose interests are being served on this? Is he saying something that the establishment, the deep state, doesn't like? And quite frequently that is the case. And all of a sudden you find out the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service are close by, observing, taking pictures, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other thing that struck me about this article is just how obvious it is that the U.S. foreign policy establishment never, ever learns. They keep doing the same thing over and over again. They're the most uncreative, unintelligent people, I think, on earth. The only people doing any thinking about foreign policy are people who can never even hope to get positions of power in the Beltway. But here's my Exhibit A for this assertion. If you go to the next one, a U.S. official and person familiar with the administration's discussions on Cuba told me that President Trump and his aides have grown frustrated that the U.S. pressure campaign, which includes starving the island of fuel, has not led Cuba's leaders to agree to significant reform. In other words, sanctions haven't worked. Oh, are you surprised? It's been going for 70 years. They haven't worked, and you're surprised. Here's a quote. "The mood has definitely changed," said one person familiar with the discussions. Quote, "The initial idea was that the leadership was weak, and the combination of stepped-up sanctions and enforcement, really oil blockade and clear U.S. military wins in Venezuela and Iran, would scare the Cubans into making a deal." There we go again. The same idea. Now go to the next one. Here's more of the same example of magical thinking on the part of the foreign policy establishment and even some of the military, especially the neocons. U.S. military planners are weighing an array of options beyond grabbing one or two individuals, I'm told. The military action could range from a single airstrike meant to scare the regime into concessions to a ground invasion meant to uproot it. So either we'll drop a few random bombs, Dr. Paul, or we'll go full Bay of Pigs. And neither of them are going to work. It's their homeland. People defend their homeland. It's not rocket science.
Hey, you mentioned that sanctions don't work out like they think. And intimidation, and the threats, it doesn't work. But you could also add that the bombs aren't a very good tool either, because just think of the number of bombs that we dropped in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The people, are thinking, but I'm not giving up my homeland.
Yeah.
What's hard for the American people to think about is, what if it were happening to us by and actually this is not totally out of the picture. What if someday there is a government that replaces our government as the king of the hill?
Yeah.
And that is going to be a different story when it's thrown back at us. And of course, the whole reason we're trying to exist is that everybody give up on this aggressiveness, and since the benefits are so amazing, if you have a society like that, it just amazes me that there aren't more people saying less government, less bombs, less wars. And of course, this argument's going on for 10 years, 20 years, or 2 or 3 centuries.
Yeah, exactly. And we'd be the same way. Again, like you say, what if China does? I mean, they're pretty close. If they ascend and they actually want to have political power over the countries, which I would argue they don't. They just want to do business. But that could change. What if they did then? They started trying to undermine our country, our government.
And I think China's involved in the monetary thing. And I think the monetary issue may be the driving force, rather than seeing the troops coming and invading Florida or something like that. I think it's going to be the destruction of the dollar. And the dollar is these interest rates that everybody's concerned about now affects everybody. That is the sign that the dollar is getting weaker.
Yeah.
And people have, people are going to suffer from it. It's a price, and that's why goods and services are going to go up, because of the interest rates are going to go up. And and we've lived with this whole idea that you can borrow. How many? I wonder how many people. I always wonder about these things. I can't find out the answer. How many people would have more than one credit card? Well, how many people would have more than 2 credit cards?
Yeah,
Are there people that have 3 credit cards, I think?
Yeah.
So just, they just go bouncing around. And then why not? Because if you go over indebted, it's no problem. Politically, we can break some points that we will just say, you don't have to pay the bills. Student loans, don't bother paying.
Yeah.
I mean, the few people who did pay, you don't have any respect for them, because they sort of thought that we were supposed to pay, but no, they just go ahead and exempt them. They're doing that frequently. Housing is treated like that in a way. Bail them out with $1, and that's why we're facing this crisis. But they don't talk about the crisis that's there. They talk about prices are going up. Why are the prices high? Why is there too much charges for gasoline? And they might look at the war, but they don't look at the dollar, and that's where the real problem is. And so that's why it's an absolute that if you continue the road, it might be 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but eventually it's an addiction. It's a monetary addiction equivalent to the drug addict, and the drug addict only feels a bit better when it gets a fix. But eventually, you got to quit it, and they're not going to quit the spending, or you're going to have to suffer the consequence. In drugs, it's a bad consequence.
Definitely the case. But I think another factor in this whole Cuba thing is Marco Rubio, because it's been his life's purpose since he entered politics to overthrow the Cuban government. His dad, I guess, was working under Batista. He wasn't a victim of communism. He left before that. But nevertheless, I think Rubio's presidential ambitions are playing into this very heavily because he's the Secretary of State and also the National Security Advisor. And he's also, if you go to that next clip, excuse me, perhaps most intriguingly in recent weeks, Rubio has played up the idea that Cuba poses a national security threat to the U.S. So this is him. If he's able to get the Trump administration to overthrow the Cuban government, that is a huge feather in his cap as he looks to 2028 and a presidential run. I'm sure Miriam Adelson will also write him a big check like she did to President Trump. So I think that's a big factor in that. But I see we're going overtime, so I'm going to close out. If you just put that very last clip up, our good friends over at Moon does Artisan Coffee. They are our affiliates with this show. There's a QR code. You go ahead and get some Ron Paul Liberty Report Revolution Blend, organic gourmet coffee. It's good stuff. He helps support the Institute as well. And I do want to thank everyone for watching the show and remind you to please hit the like, hit the thumbs up, hit the heart, hit whatever you want, but help us promote the show. And we appreciate that. Over to you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. I want to thank all our viewers for tuning in today because we depend on you for helping us to spread this message of liberty. Because without that, there's not going to be any significant changes in the world unless people pay more attention. I often wondered whether we should offer and work it out where they would agree to bring key people here from Cuba and Venezuela and give them a required course in Austrian economics. And I believe I could create one that would not use force, but tempt them to come in. So someday we will, and it will be converted to the principles of peace and prosperity. Please come back to the Liberty Report soon.
Thanks for watching the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Like and subscribe to help spread the message. And until next time, live free.
This country is in a revolution.